Part 93. Terror Broadcast. Author, Chunji Dixiaolong. Chapter 934. Subai has not been sick for a long time, maybe because he has recovered his past memories, and after seeing all of some things, he has taken a dim view of them, and naturally began to slowly let go. It may also be that there are too many things that are helpless, such as the little guy who is still trapped in the orphanage and falls into a deep sleep, such as his cheap parents who have long since disappeared and may become the next generation of broadcasting consciousness, such as the destruction of listeners that broadcasting must implement. Plans, such as the final time limit for enlightenment, etc. On the one hand, it is relief, on the other hand, it is helplessness. It is already difficult for you to risk your life to become hysterical, even if it is to exchange for a trace of pain and displeasure from the other party. Just like the life of ordinary people, from the frivolity of youth to the smoothing of edges in middle age, this is a dynamic process. Perhaps, even Subai himself had forgotten some things, but fortunately, those things were still imprinted deep in his soul and in his bones. This isn't an arcade game where you can keep tossing in coins to play again if your character dies. Subai would not allow this talisman to be affixed to his forehead. He would not allow himself to fall into the absolute darkness seal like this. The little guy was still in the orphanage waiting for him to be picked up after he attained enlightenment. Suyuhang Lu Menjiu and I are still waiting for him to go to that world to find the opportunity to kill them. There are still things that I have to do that I have not done, even if those things seem difficult or even disappointing. This is not a reason to end or avoid myself. If I were to choose sleep and permanent closure, why wait until now? Bring it on. Hold on to your long arm. Hold on to it. Resist. Resist. Go to hell with the imperial power, go to hell with Dechin, go to hell with the first emperor. Subai kept yelling in his heart. He didn't know whether his thoughts could control the soldier, but this was the only thing Subai could do now. Unfortunately, there are no historical records, otherwise the prince will be in peace with you. The slogan Zhong who has nothing to do with Days Township. Click. There was a crisp sound, which was the sound of the friction between the armor and the body. The changa in Qin Bing's hand suddenly stabbed diagonally forward. Zalong cast his gaze here, and in his eyes there seemed to be a majesty that was incomparable to mountains and rivers. The stabbing Chang Ji suddenly came to a standstill at this time, and even had a vague tendency to withdraw. This is just a soldier, and the worship and infinite loyalty of Qin soldiers in this era to Zalong cannot even be achieved by the dictators who are best at brainwashing in later generations, because Zalong is a god, the god in the hearts of these Qin soldiers. Su Fu also began to exert strength at this time, and the strength blocking him in front of him began to gradually fade away under his squeeze. Feng, reincarnation in the past and present. The talisman in Su Fu's hand quickly moved downwards, with an indomitable momentum. You are just a small soldier. Even if you are one of the last 500 survivors, you still have no reason or qualification to dare to show such a will to resist. Otherwise, are you worthy of the tens of thousands of people who have just become the nourishment for your body? Subai's eyes were about to split, and he began to roar desperately and angrily. For Subai, even if he put aside the reasons for his personal personality, even if he put aside the reasons for the audience's fear of radio, a slightly normal modern person would not. He would be foolish enough to pay foolish allegiance to a so-called emperor. But despite this, Subai still remained motionless, but Subai did not give up the struggle. If he chose a photo for the last moment of his life, Subai hoped that he in the photo would be hysterical rather than resigned to his fate. This may be the only thing he can do now. Something to choose from. Grandmother. Sister. Grandmother. Sister. Who is it? Subai felt extremely unfamiliar with these two titles that suddenly appeared in his mind. Aniu. Damn, who is Aniu? Suddenly, Subai felt that a gap was opened in his consciousness at this moment. Then, his perception of the environment at this moment became extremely clear. Before, he was only seeing things through this person's perspective. Like an appreciator of a movie, standing outside the screen and watching the plot progress. The slight difference is that this movie shot was shot using a technology similar to VR, so it is a first-person perspective. But now, that barrier was suddenly broken, and he seemed to have completely entered the screen and became a real participant. Subai saw the old woman standing by the door at the entrance of the pastoral village. This was his mother, watching him go on an expedition. She was waiting for him to earn his title and return home, exchange land, and pay for corvée. There is absolutely no way this woman is Lu Menjiao. Subai felt that if Lu Menjiao had to choose between turning into this old woman and making this gesture or dying, Lu Menjiao would choose the latter without hesitation. But Subai felt that the other party was his mother. Next to the old woman, there was a young woman standing. This was her sister. Outside the courtyard, an old scalper was tied there. Wrong. This is not right. This memory is wrong. Since that was an era of high martial arts, why were oxen still used to pull the land? Subai suddenly realized that he seemed to have fallen into a misunderstanding. This was not the memory of this Jin Bing. This was the imagination he naturally made in his mind based on external stimulation. This was his own imagination. Su Fu's talisman will be posted soon. But at this moment, Subai, who had taken control of his body, completely abandoned all other miscellaneous thoughts, and simply picked up Chang Ji and swept it towards the bastard old man in front of him. Boom! Su Fu's body collapsed when he was touched by Chang Ji. Immediately afterwards, many Qin soldiers around him who had not had time to put the talisman paper into the coffin began to attack him. Subai started to kill. His fighting movements were completely different from those of the Qin soldiers. If those Qin soldiers were fighting in a wide open and closed battle formation, then Subai was now more like a crazy beast, attacking, to bite, and to use any means to annihilate those who dare to threaten him. A number of Qin soldiers fell in front of him. Their bodies were instantly destroyed as soon as they were touched by Chang Ji. Subai's killing did not stop until he killed everyone he could see below. He raised his head and looked into the air, and the man was also looking at him from the air. Subai raised his Chang Ji again. Even if the person in front of him was Xiaolong, he would still wave the weapon in his hand. However, when Subai's Changa was about to touch Xiaolong, Xiaolong's figure changed, and everything around him was also changing, like a huge piece of plasticine. It was reshaped, or rather, it was thrown to the ground and turned into mud again. Everything around him began to disappear, replaced by a circle of white mist. Water veins. This is the Sanjiang water vein. Own. Is it out? Subai lowered his head and found that he had changed back to himself. This was his own body, not that strange Qin Bing. Then, Subai looked in front of him. This should be the core area of Sanjiang, and it is also the location where 3 bronze chains intersect. A pair of armor was placed here, arranged neatly, as if there was a plastic mannequin supporting the armor, but there was no figure inside the armor. This feeling reminded Subai of a very old Japanese anime called The Demon Altar Fighter. However, this time the Chinese style of the armor is clearer. The surrounding water mist drew a circle here, forming a vacuum cyclone, and 3 bronze chains lay quietly here. Although he couldn't see anyone and only had a pair of armor in front of him, Subai knew clearly that there was a person. Literally locked here. One lock. 2,000 years. The vampire in the story world of Cinderella was the bodyguard of Alexander the Great, and the current one, if nothing else, should be the real owner of the scenes he just saw through the first-person perspective through the Yin soldiers. What he read was just his memory, and what he saw was just the picture he saw. Moreover, this guy had just taken action against himself. A smile appeared at the corner of Subai's mouth, because when he raised his head, he saw a simple talisman floating there. So, you want me to bear the suppression of this talisman for you? So that you can regain your freedom. I would rather fight to death than be sealed for no reason. I feel that I did nothing wrong. In fact, your reaction and choice are much more radical than mine. I dare not show any disrespect to Zalong. A man's voice echoed around, with a touch of vicissitudes of life. I want to know where those coffins and Sufu's team went, Subai asked. Do you think I might know? The armor began to be slowly propped up, and an entity gradually formed inside, as if he had been sitting there before, but he was just being seen by you now. You are the second person to enter here in the past 2,000 years. It's a pity then. It seems that you didn't succeed the first time. Subai could sense that the person in front of him was definitely not a big shot audience, but his existence should be similar to Chen Ryu's, and he couldn't reach that level. But his strength was extremely terrifying. Subai even felt that the opponent could kill a big shot audience. Tens of thousands of Qin soldiers used their own blood and flesh to finally cast out the last 500 people, and he was one of them. You've already entered, you can't get out, some things can't be copied. So, who was the last person who came in and went out? Subai asked. Perhaps because of the scene experience just now, Subai felt a little disappointed even in the face of this situation, feeling like he was dwarfed by the big one. He said his name was Fugui. Terror Broadcast. Author, Chunji Dixiaolong. Chapter 935. The orphanage is still the same orphanage, it stands here alone, like a work of art. In fact, as long as anything is separated from its original use and placed alone, it will more or less have some artistic quality. It's just a matter of opinion. Lizzie's childhood is inseparable from the orphanage. She is somewhat similar to Subai. The orphanage to her is almost the same concept as the painting to Subai. It is the pain, anger, and remaining nostalgia that have been crushed. The hodgepodge made by stirring them together is not delicious, but you can't bear to throw it away. For Chen Ryu, she and Li Ji are both women, so when looking at this orphanage, it seems as if she is admiring Leonardo da Vinci's Mona Lisa. Each generation of listeners has its own circle and its own the legend of this generation, and it is even more difficult for a person to be able to spread his name among generations of listeners. Chen Ryu envied Lichi very much. She did not regard Lichi as her role model. After all, there are many roads and everyone takes their own path. But she envied Lichi for being able to appreciate the scenery that she could not appreciate now earlier than she did. This day was the 5th day after Subai and the others left. Chen Ryu walked out of the tent and washed herself. She made breakfast for herself like an ordinary camper. I smell the sauerkraut. A man's figure appeared beside the tent, looking very casual. I knew I couldn't hide it from you, you cooked 3 bags of noodles. Chen Ryu was still cooking noodles by herself. In fact, she didn't know how to face this person. This person seemed very simple, because his reputation was just one word, coward. But it seems that this one word cannot fully explain his whole person. It seems that you and I have the same taste. When I eat instant noodles, I only like to eat the unified Laotan pickled cabbage beef noodles. The cover is Wang Han's. I don't like the other brands of pickled cabbage noodles, Liang Sen said in the small room. He sat down next to the pot. Chen Ryu filled a bowl for herself and then sat on the other side. This woman was once so bold that she broke into a place of enlightenment and attempted to steal. But at this moment, sitting with this man and no one else around, she felt a thorn in her back. Boss Liang did not regard himself as an outsider. He took a pair of chopsticks and started eating directly from the pot without looking for a bowl. A real boss-level listener, a listener whose combat power is comparable to a boss level, is just sitting on the desolate mountainside eating boiled instant noodles, and the sound of walking can be heard from time to time. After dinner, Chen Ryu was lying against a stone, as if looking at the clouds in the sky or simply in a daze. Boss Liang stood up and walked to the door of the orphanage. The surrounding area is a bit desolate, Boss Liang said. In fact, it's not that there is a problem with the location of Lichi. In fact, this place was considered beautiful before, but Subai's discussion with Chen Ryu turned all the greenery on the mountainside into its own vitality, making the place desolate. Many. Chen Ryu didn't explain this to Liang Senator. In fact, the other party's self-righteousness made Chen Ryu feel that the other party was not that scary. Horrible. Why do you think he is scary? What is there to be afraid of? Chen Ryu felt that she was a little baffled today. You know, I've liked her for a long time, Boss Liang said to himself, like a little hanging silk telling his innocent little story, with a touch of piety. You once wanted to place your tombstone next to her, but it was directly knocked down. She said, "Are you worthy?" Chen Ryu tried her best to appear natural. Perhaps, making fun of her was a good thing. Let the other party improve their own choices at the same time. Who told you? I won't tell you, Chen Ryu replied with a smile, and sold Subai directly. In fact, the two of them were just joking with each other, because when that incident happened, there were only a few places of enlightenment. Individuals, one Subai, one Fugui, and two black cats. Wealth. Boss Liang didn't obsess over Subai. In fact, the little detective had already annoyed him. His parents, his relationship with Li Ji, his current life and the group of friends around him, Liang Sen felt that it's a bit annoying. Perhaps the most important reason is that the general manager, whom he regards as a forbidden person, always wants to get into the other party's circle. It's like you work so hard to raise a dog, but the next door neighbor waved your dog and ran into his arms. No matter how you yelled, you couldn't call him back. Of course, this kind of inner little emotion is naturally not humane to outsiders. By the way, you seem to have never seen wealth, because you haven't attained enlightenment yet, Boss Liang said. What do you want to do here? Chen Ryu asked. Just take a walk, just take a look. I am the only big boss left in this world. I suddenly feel so lonely, so I want to find someone to chat with. You are qualified to chat with me. Chen Ryu suddenly felt that Boss Liang in front of her was like a husky that had become more majestic after all the other dogs in the kennel were sent away. Look, I told you not to be nervous. I am a very easygoing person. Liang Sen still had a warm smile on his face. Chen Ryu was shocked. Just now, her mind was being led away by the other party. If the other party hadn't reminded her, she wouldn't have noticed it at all. What are you going to do? Chen Ryu no longer lay comfortably, but stood up. This time, she needed an answer. She was like an angry tigress, needing a strong hand. Roar to declare your sovereignty and glory? But it can also be seen from the side that the pressure caused by Boss Liang's appearance forced her to make a proactive response. Really, just take a look, just take a look. Boss Liang pointed at the orphanage door in front of him. Her breath seemed to still linger on this completely sealed orphanage. Unfortunately, although she was sitting, the train has come back, but now it has gone to that place again. I want to see her a few more times. You are very strange today. Chen Ryu opened her palms, and a blazing white light rose up, with the aura of burning. I have always been very straightforward in doing things. You and I are confused, and I am also confused. I can only face it in the way I am best at. No, I won't fight you. If I can't beat you, wouldn't it be a shame? The only remaining big shot in the world was defeated by a high-level audience. Can I still mess around? Boss Liang took a few steps back and appeared directly on the hilltop opposite. Thousands of meters away, this was Liang Sen's statement that he was not here to fight Chen Ryu. I just came to see her. It's that simple, Boss Liang explained repeatedly. You can understand that she is about to be unlucky, and then I, a loser who was rejected at the beginning, came here to take a look and gain some inner satisfaction. Unlucky. Chen Ryu caught hold of these two words, You didn't receive the ticket. Why do you know what's going to happen over there? Don't say it, don't say it. Boss Liang turned around and disappeared on the top of the mountain. Chen Ryu turned her palms down, and the blazing heat disappeared completely. She still didn't understand what the man was going to do. Everything was so inexplicable. Lelongtu scenic area is not far from the urban area of Qinhuangdao, but it has almost entered the off-season for tourism recently, so there are not many tourists here, giving people a very desolate feeling. Look at the closed areas because there are not many tourists. The public restrooms that get up give people an even more desolate atmosphere. The taxi stopped at the entrance of the scenic spot. Qin Yang looked at Xie Zhen, who was napping on the seat behind him, and reminded, "We're here." Xie Zhen opened his eyes. Lelongtu was considered the entrance to the Great Wall, but the Great Wall now had no connection with the Qin Great Wall he had seen back then. Even if it did not include the renovation after the founding of the People's Republic of China, it was just the repairs of the past dynasties. The reconstruction has already changed the original flavor beyond recognition. "Do you have Liang Sen's contact information on your phone?" Xie Zhen asked. Liang Sen, Qin Yang was stunned for a moment, shook his head and said, "He and I are too far apart, so I don't have his contact information, but you should have it." "But he won't answer my call at this time." Xie Sun took out his mobile phone and said, "During the time when the original owner of this body regained control of his body, he desperately tried to contact his boss, but his boss may be feeling guilty, and he behaves irresponsibly and completely ignores any contact from him. I feel like a scumbag." Qin Yang also tentatively made a joke with the person behind him. Although he had a wife and children, he didn't know why he felt like a scumbag when he was with this person. Like the mentality of the eunuch serving in the palace. "It's hard for you to go any further." Xie Zhen suddenly changed the topic. "You have too many concerns and worries about gains and losses, so it's hard for you to go any further." "There are some things that I won't give up," Qin Yang explained. "Your worries are not an excuse for you to be decadent and afraid to face it." Ji Zhen rolled down the car window helplessly. Outside, the sun was shining brightly, but in Ji Zhen's eyes, there was a kind of grey mist. This feeling, is the same as it was 2000 years ago. I can feel that it is looking at me, as if it is looking at something interesting." Qin Yang heard who Xie Zhen was talking about. This time, he didn't dare to join in the joke. "It's a pity. Sure enough, that person is still unreliable. He doesn't rely on either side and always wants to step on two boats. This may be his instinct." Xie Zhen reached out and touched his own gently. "Temple, based on this person's memory and understanding of that person, I think that person may be looking for a place to vent the pleasure of revenge after being rejected and slapped in the face by that woman. It is also strange that a person like this can actually become the most powerful person in the world at this stage. Do you think this is ironic? You are listening to Novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. Terror Broadcast. Author, Chunji Dixiaolong. Chapter 936. Wealth. Su Fugui. Has he been here before? So, did he also get the original technique of the third ancient zombie transformation from here? Even if he took advantage of the unique conditions here, Su Fugui might have created his own kung fu here. After all, the first turn of the 3 turns of Guzhan was fine, but the second turn had to be completely dependent on the outside world. Environment can be achieved. Subai didn't have much nervousness or panic. After all, in the sense of substitution just now, he had even met the first emperor, and even personally felt the power of the emperor in the first emperor. The current situation compared to just now, this scene seems a bit unattractive. In other words, it is equivalent to aesthetic fatigue. So, you want to drag me and seal it here with you? Subai looked at the surrounding environment. He was really thinking about what his future life would be like if he stayed here all the time. It seems that, with the previous experience of being locked in the place of enlightenment, Subai has really gained a lot of adaptability to that kind of confinement and isolation. "I need to get out," the being in the armor said. Subai heard it, and the other party's voice became clearer and smoother. This should be a sign that he was constantly waking up. Think about it, there is still a underworld in the place of enlightenment, and Subai can rely on it. Huang Quan goes to absorb corpse gas every day and converts it into his own energy, which is similar to ordinary people eating, but what is here? In addition to the white mist, it is still water mist, and there is this talisman drawn by Su Fu himself, which means that all external influences have been abandoned. Although this guy has been tens of thousands of Qin tigers for 2,000 years, they have killed each other by raising poison. One of the remaining 500 evil stars, but if he had maintained a normal physical condition after 2,000 years of completely isolated prison life, he might have become a human being. Before, he was like some hibernating animal, leaving only there is a ray of consciousness outside, but the rest of the body's functions are completely in a state of suspended animation. This scene was used by Subai when he was still a senior and saw the big boss vampire on the train coming back from that world. Unfortunately, the big boss was tricked to death by himself before he fully woke up. Of course, that incident Subai is just the effect, the real cause is what the vampire said before he died, that Lychee tricked them. "Do you know that I am waking up, but you don't want to take action in advance? Or are you so confident in yourself?" The other party seemed to be a little surprised by Subai's indifference, because no one who could reach this level of strength was really a fool. "I know a friend who is best at illusions, but his illusions have no effect on me, and your illusions, no, in my opinion, your methods are not even illusions, they can only it's considered a scam, it's really too low level. For example, in order to confuse me in the memory scene and make me think that I was you at that time, you thought you were clever and inserted grandma and grandma into my consciousness, and even brought an Anya. For example, now, I guess there is no if I'm wrong, you should have resisted Zalong's will, so you were punished and sealed here. I don't know why Zalong didn't just kill you, bleed you, and gave it to others to drink and replenish. But your treatment and the things you have committed definitely mean you are a sinner. But the armor you are wearing is completely different from the black armor of the Qin soldiers in the memory. I am not a historical researcher, but I can still tell that the armor you are wearing is at least something that a general can wear. Is it possible that Zalong locked you up here and gave you a promotion?" The armor suddenly stood up and took a step forward. The figure inside it slowly solidified at this time, but then, it staggered back as if it was extremely laborious, and even stood unsteadily. Directly changed from standing to sitting. This is a little soldier. Even though he has lived for 2,000 years, he has been sleeping almost for these 2,000 years. In fact, his mind is still almost the same as before. He is not an old fox who travels around the world to see through the world. Even some of his methods and planning were inferior to those of some ordinary senior people. When placed in front of Subai, it really seemed like he was trying to do what he did best. "Help me out, and I will satisfy you on one condition." The being in the armor seemed to have accepted his fate. The man in front of him gave him a very powerless feeling. Of course, under the powerlessness, there was also anger and aggrievedness. If he didn't have this talisman above his head, if he didn't have this armor on his body, he could easily kill countless people in front of him. "Then why didn't the old rich man let you out?" Subai frowned. Unfortunately, the old rich man had already returned to his ashes. At the time, he didn't expect that the succession of the guardians of the place of enlightenment would actually happen. It's the world that separates Su Fugui and himself. How many secrets does the living dead man who lay in a coffin at the place of enlightenment for 20 years and killed countless guardians of the West hide? "He's afraid," the voice in the armor said with a hint of ridicule and reminiscence, "he's afraid of letting me out. Now, it is not the era you were in before. I think you should also know that Great Qin has died long ago, and the world today is completely different from the world before. There is an eye hanging in the sky, always watching here. But that eye can only focus on one world, the voice in the armor responded. What do you know? Subai asked with some interest. Anyway, he hasn't figured out a way to get out now, so he might as well chat with this ancient man from 2000 years ago to relieve his boredom. That's what Fugui said. He said it wasn't time to release me yet. He said he would come and release me later. But he never came, and I think Fugui has already forgotten his agreement with you, because he was locked up in one place for 20 years, and the first and only thing he did after he came out was the thing is to dig out the urn of his deceased wife and disappear with her. You see, you have no place in his heart at all. Subai paused and continued, if I guess correctly, the reason why Fugui was able to get out of here was because of your active help, right? After all, Su Fugui obtained the inheritance of Qin Bing's body refining method here, and also created the third level of ancient zombie here. It is difficult to find a complete inheritance from those ruins, and there are only a few words in the ruins. It is very likely that the person in front of him taught Qin Bing's physical training method to Fugui more than 20 years ago. Then Fugui drew him a Fugui brand pie, then patted his butt and walked away, forgetting about him at all. Yes, he didn't come, but I feel that the time for me to go out is getting closer and closer, the voice in the armor said with a touch of sadness. His Royal Highness the eldest son who has been sleeping above me has woken up. Things should start. Then I ask you what those things are and you have to answer me that you don't know. Subai showed a sarcastic smile. This guy is really simple and cute, especially when others chose to obey. He was the only one who chose to disobey and refused to be put into a coffin with a talisman on it, which revealed a sense of stupidity. It's just a pity that Fugui played this guy once when he came here. He has already done it once. It is almost impossible for him to do it again, and the other party will no longer believe in the pie he painted. Zalong locked me up here and didn't choose to execute me. There must be a deep meaning. It's just that I haven't figured it out after thinking about it for 2000 years. The other party seemed to be in a state of memory killing. Subai raised his head and carefully observed the talisman paper. The fat man also played with talismans, but it was obviously the same as the feeling when Su Fu used the talisman in the memory screen. There are too many differences, but after all, 2000 years have passed, and this talisman paper has become a bit mottled, which means that it is at the end of the road. And once the talisman expires, it's hard to say whether the armor alone can continue to suppress this guy. Subai began to try his best to write down the pattern of the talisman in his heart, planning to let Fatty study it after he went out. This talisman will be annihilated in 20 years, the man said as if he noticed that Subai was observing the talisman paper. 20 years, I can't wait for that day, Subai shrugged. He probably only had 2 years left if he had fully calculated. In these 2 years, the radio might complete the listener destruction plan, and then he might be destruction also makes it possible to get on a train and go to that world. That's a pity, I can't kill you with my own hands. I don't seem to have offended you, Subai pointed at himself and said. You have that person's inheritance, and that person's inheritance was deceived from me. The cause planted in the past and the result today are all up to you. Ha! Subai now felt that the vampire who had been imprisoned in the Vatican for more than 1,000 years seemed much more normal in his behavior. Okay, I'll stand here and let you kill. Are you going to kill me? Subai took the initiative to take 2 steps forward, reached out and touched the opponent's armor gently, with a strong sense of ridicule. And joking. Dong dong dong. Subai knocked on the opponent's helmet and said lazily, wait until you can come out of this iron bastard one day before you talk about killing me for revenge. Boom. There was a huge thunder, and a purple thunder suddenly fell, hitting the barrier created by the talisman paper. The talisman paper that Su Fu had sealed here for more than 2,000 years immediately fell into pieces and turned into flying ash and dissipated. This scene happened so fast and suddenly that both Subai and the man in the armor beside Subai seemed to be in a state of confusion for a short time. "Ha, Dabai, why don't you kneel down and sing conquer to thank me for saving my life? Ha 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 ha." The fat man put his hands on his hips, looking like he was the boss of the world, and smiled like a 300-pound fool. Terror Broadcast. Author, Chunji Dixiaolong. Chapter 937. The wind at the seaside carries a salty smell, but there are no farms or fishing boats nearby, so the smell is not strong. Taking a deep breath, a relieved smile appeared on Xie Zhen's face. He had been beaten by his father back then. The emperor appointed General Meng Tian to lead an army of 300,000 to garrison at the Great Wall. Although the scenery and people had long been changed beyond recognition, at least he could still re-experience in his heart the high-spiritedness that belonged to him. If darkness hadn't fallen, he should have been the second Qin, not the younger brother who was pushed to the throne after the empire collapsed. History has its own way of writing, but what happened at that time cannot be reproduced in historical records. After sweeping across the Liuhe and Bawang, the great Qin cavalry finally collapsed in the face of darkness. The real Huhai in history is nothing more than a building. It's just the poor man holding the ashes who is about to fall down. At that time, no one wanted to sit on that throne, because it would mean 1,000 years of infamy and being a negative example. Qin Yang looked at Ji Zhen who was standing by the sea looking at the old dragon head in trance, and said, "Did you stay here more than 2,000 years ago?" "According to the records in the history books, I am here to deal with those prairie barbarians who want to take a peek at the artifact." This argument is no longer popular. At that time, you should be regarded as the sinner of preventing ethnic integration and dividing the nation. In the years after you, there were 5 chaos in China. Now the history books have been changed to, the ethnic minorities moved south. History books are meant to be used by those in power to wipe their butts. I understand this very well. Ji Zhen bent down and reached out to scoop up some seawater. My youngest brother is the biggest victim. Qin Yang didn't know how to answer the call for a moment. After all, his level was still a little lower. If he were a monk or a Buddha here, he would be able to communicate with each other in a conciliatory manner. After all, everyone has access to news and understanding of the truth. It's not equal. Therefore, Qin Yang was panicked when he knew Ji Zhen's identity, while Subai and Fatty who were in Lashan a while ago did not hesitate to roll up their sleeves and have sex with the so-called eldest son of Qin Shi Huang. One plane. This is the gap between advanced listeners and veterans, not just in terms of strength. "Is it here?" Xie Zhen asked. "I picked them up here or nearby last time." "They should be around here," Qin Yang replied. "Then, the entrance of the cave should be considered destroyed." Xie Zhen walked into the sea and began to sink. Qin Yang was still standing on the shore. Xie Zhen didn't ask him to go down with him, so he didn't choose to go down with him. When he first became an audience, his wife and children were the ones he struggled to survive in the story world. The biggest motivation, but now, they have also become further obstacles to him, but Qin Yang is very open-minded. There are many people in the audience who live in poverty and love Taoism, but people like Qin Yang who strictly abide by dogma and rules are in the minority after all. He is one of the few, and he actually enjoys it. After all, every day he spends with his wife and children is profitable for Qin Yang, and it is a great enjoyment. Turning around, Qin Yang returned to his taxi. Instead of waiting for the driver to come out, he started the car directly and prepared to go home. His wife had already prepared dinner for him. Ji Zhen's figure began to dive alone. In the end, he stood firmly on the seabed, surrounded by a barren landscape, but Ji Zhen still found his bearings again. After all, compared to the changes on land, the seabed was after all, the changes are less affected by human factors. After sneaking for more than 20 miles in the sea, Xie Zhen stopped in a low-lying area. He stretched out his hand and pushed gently in front of him. The surrounding mud and dust were immediately lifted away, revealing a cave with a pouring mouth. Finally, I found it. Xie Zhen entered the cave entrance. After a period of sneaking, his body withstood the changes in water pressure and surfaced again, arriving at the extremely desolate entrance. There were dark winds blowing around from time to time, but Xie Sun didn't care. The biggest fear in the world came from the unknown, and he didn't come here as an explorer. For him, it was actually more like revisiting his old place. The wind began to get stronger and stronger, as if a person's mood began to become more and more impatient. Since the last time the water level reversed, everything here seemed to have been washed again and looked very clean. After all, it had only been a few years since Subai and others came here last time, and this time was really too short for things in the sea. Xie Zhen looked around as if he was looking for something, then stepped on the empty space in front of him, and then, as if he were walking on a flat road, he began to move deeper. If you look closer, you can see that there are things like piers at Xie Zhen's feet to rest on, and each of these piers is a human head. This is a road paved with corpses. Corpses stand in the water to support a road. In other directions, the space is upside down. If you enter casually, you will probably never come out again. Xie Zhen didn't have much nostalgia for this place. He even saw many other heretics, which meant that this place, which was founded more than 2,000 years ago, had been visited many times by outsiders in history, and some people got out alive. Some people have to stay here and accompany this dead silence forever. On the water in the diagonal direction, an awning boat appeared, with a big red lantern hanging on the boat, flashing a strange red light. This scene is a bit similar to Zhengzhihua's Stars Light Up, it illuminates you the door back home. But it's a pity that the people on that ship will have to be tourists forever unless something unexpected happens. Xie Zhen stopped, not because of the awning boat, but because another figure appeared behind him. The figure was a little blurry, but its target was indeed himself. 3 or 5 bottles, force 2 punches, it's fate to hit more or less. Baccarat, game room, Chinese gambling to calm down. The man was chanting a jingle and holding a deck of playing cards in his hand. He looked like he was overindulging in indulgence. He squinted and walked out from somewhere behind, looking at Xie Zhen in a swaying manner. If Subai were here at this time, he should be able to recognize this person. This person had also interacted with Subai before. He was Xiaolin. Xiaolin is a very talented listener, but it is a pity that he took 2 wrong boats in a row. The first one was with Lao Fang's family, which made him completely break with Monk Subai and others, and the second one was here where he lost his life. Dead. Just like the middle school teacher Gu who had sex with the fat man and discussed his life ideals, those who can advance to the level of advanced listeners and finally give sermons must be the best among the listeners, but not all of those who fall in the middle are idiots. Ji Zhen just looked at the person in front of him. Oh no, to be precise, this is not a person, just a dead soul detained here because of deep resentment. If you look more carefully, it is not even a dead soul. Xiaolin looked at Xie in a nonchalant manner, swaying as if he was drunk. You stay and make money with me. This is an invitation from Xiaolin. Once upon a time, there was a mahjong panic in Hong Kong, which was a mysterious incident where a person died one after another and found his former mahjong friends to come down and play mahjong with him. Almost. You can come with me, and I can take you out, Xie Zhen suddenly said. Xiaolin was stunned for a moment, then shook his head violently. Brother, who am I? Is it possible that you can deceive me if you want? People are dead, but they still retain their shrewdness in life. Xie Zhen reached out and rubbed his chin. In fact, the environment here has not changed much from more than 2,000 years ago, including the formations here. But someone added something here, such as this awning boat and the person standing in front of him at this time. The mirror that Su Fu left behind seemed to have been tampered with. As soon as he thought about it, Xie Zhen's face turned slightly gloomy. At his level, not to mention his own strength, his current body is also the strength of a high-level audience. Between happiness and anger, he can naturally resonate with the surrounding environment. This made Xiao Lin's body seem to start to sway, and his voice and movements began to become erratic. Xie Zhen had an ominous premonition in his heart. If the mirror was only slightly modified, the problem should not be big, but if it was changed too much, it would probably affect what he wanted to do next. Things to do. With a casual stroke of his hand, a red thread flew out and stretched behind him. Xiao Lin and the awning boat behind him seemed to be afraid of this red line and did not continue to follow Xie Zhen. At the end of Renta Road, there is a fan-shaped piece of bare ground. Xie Zhen settled here. Some traces of violent friction can be found around it. A battle broke out here, and it should only be 2 or 3 years ago. I, Yingfu Su, with the life of my blood, order you to appear. Ji Zhen's fingertips touched the center of his eyebrows and took out a drop of soul blood. His current body belonged to Ji Zhen, so naturally he did not have royal blood, but his soul blood was different. Blood beads were flying in all directions, as if sensing the call. A mirror as tall as a person appeared from the void. Xie Zhen walked to the mirror, put his hand on the mirror, closed his eyes, and after a while, Xie Zhen opened his eyes. For the first time, an emotion called anger appeared in his eyes, even though he had just returned from the mirror before. This emotion never appeared in his eyes when he broke away from the seal in the giant Buddha and fought with Subai back and forth. Who did it? Who did it? Terror Broadcast. Author, Chunji Disiao. Chapter 939. Fatty appears as a savior, at least that's what Fatty thinks in his heart. Dabai is trapped in a strange seal. In order to save Dabai from water and fire, he even tries to save Dabai, which he has never been able to summon before. The triple mysterious thunder had been successfully summoned because this thunder had the property of specifically restraining the barrier. To Fatty's surprise, the summoning was successful this time. Therefore, at this time, Fatty's heart felt the pleasure of becoming Dabai's savior and at the same time the satisfaction of furthering his Tao skills. He was so happy that he was almost floating. The monk and Buddha immediately saw that something was wrong. The monk immediately reached out and took the fat man's arm and shouted, "No, there is a problem." Buzz. 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 Subai had no time to deal with the fat man who was still in a good state, because the guy in front of him who couldn't stand up just now actually stood up and looked much more relaxed than before. The scene suddenly fell into silence, and the fat man who had just been so proud finally came to his senses at this time. The seal has been released. You can choose to go out for a walk, broadcast, oh no, before the darkness takes action against you. Take a look at this great land. Subai felt that he was enlightening a child who had been suppressed for a long time. But a bad feeling has arisen in my heart. Why didn't I kill you first? The voice in the armor was filled with confusion, and then, a pair of red eyes flashed out from the armor's helmet, staring at Subai. Really? For a moment, Subai felt like facing his former self. You really are, and you can't explain why. Even though broadcasting is now ready to move, it is still here after all. As for Fusu's appearance and the escape of the man in front of him, Subai definitely doesn't believe broadcasting. He doesn't know why broadcasting hasn't started to deal with them yet. That's questions for broadcast consideration. That person deceived me back then. Now, I use his inheritance to atone for the sins he committed. This is fair. Boom. The other party hit him directly like a bison, and the surrounding water veins felt distorted due to his movement. It is conceivable that the three rivers must be turbulent now. Subai originally wanted to fight back with his fists, but soon changed his strategy. Although the success of Guzong's second transformation almost made him a real zombie, With a physique similar to immortality, the accumulated sequelae after the first use are indeed too obvious. Now Subai really doesn't dare to overly damage his body in battle. Subai immediately crossed his arms and placed them across his chest in a blocking posture, and then began to retreat. Boom! The opponent's armor is very hard, and the feeling of relying purely on body, speed, and strength to crush you is so clear. Subai's whole body was directly knocked away. At the same time, the surrounding people, the water veins, also began to twist. It was obvious that Fatty's formation could no longer be maintained, and he and the others were about to be forced to leave the area. Although the fat man was funny, he could not tell the situation clearly at the critical moment. Before the strange suit of armor attacked Subai, he and the monk had already started to dismantle his formation in unison. This is equivalent to what Jinjing created in Guangzhou. The virtual space is just a leaf attached to the real world. Although there is no strong support from the outside, after all, it is outside, so it is easier for the broadcasters to see it, right? Maybe it can attract nearby listeners or let the radio broadcast real-life tasks to find some helpers. Subai was knocked away at once, and the being in the armor did not take advantage of the situation to pursue him. His red eyes glanced at the fat man and the monk, and as if he understood what they were going to do, he directly held it with one hand. Wow! 3 bronze chains that were originally lying here rose up. They were stretched straight like 3 giant bronze dragons, exuding a kind of chill. At the same time, they were like pillars that built this space, holding the originally weak and soft ones together. This space has become extremely stable. In other words, these 3 bronze chains are like a lock, completely locking this area. How come a single person can control this chain? The fat man was a little angry. He had been injured by Fusu with a bronze chain before, so he still had some psychological shadow about this thing. This chain is not controlled by him. In fact, this chain is used to lock him. The principle is to borrow the power of the 3 rivers to suppress him. Now he only needs to stimulate the chain, and the formation represented by the chain will react naturally. Blocking this space is equivalent to locking us in here, the monk said. On the other side, Subai felt a numbness in his arms, and at the same time, there was still a residual power of shock in his limbs. After just a simple exchange of blows, he was completely crushed by physical contact. This feeling was really, Subai didn't like it very much. The man did not continue to attack Subai, but rushed towards Fatty and the others with a bit of cat and mouse intention. The fat man and the monk immediately retreated subconsciously. The fat man took out the formation weapon, while the monk made a hand gesture, preparing to summon the Bodhisattva to possess him. At the same time, Buddha stepped forward to help the monk and the fat man buy time. The 4 of them are really familiar with each other, so when faced with this situation, everyone can make the most appropriate response without any prior discussion. Facing the opponent's menacing attack, Buddha drew out his hatchet and held it horizontally at his side. Lord Buddha, don't hit his armor, it's his second seal, Subai immediately reminded. Foye was stunned for a moment. Subai's reminder completely disrupted his rhythm. At that moment, Foye, who had planned to chop down directly, could only forcefully change the direction of the sword and hit it sideways with the hatchet. Boom! Buddha was not knocked away. At the same time as the impact occurred, a layer of black flames burned all over his body, just like Yama walking out of the underworld. However, a terrifying cyclone formed beside Buddha, and the surrounding white mist was completely dispersed in an instant. With Subai's lessons learned, it was of course impossible for Buddha to confront the opponent head-on. Instead, he used his skill to remove the force of the opponent's impact. The other party seemed to be very amused by Foye's reaction. He immediately reached out his hand and tried to grab Foye's shoulder. Foye threw his body aside and actively hit him over his shoulder. Buzz! A trembling sound came out, and the opponent's figure was unexpectedly knocked aside by Buddha. But the next moment, the opponent's feet suddenly took a step forward, and the whole person spun half-axis like a top, and then hit the Buddha hard back. Body. This time the force was even stronger than last time, and it even contained the force exerted by Buddha himself when he just hit it. There was only an explosion, and a huge blood hole was knocked out of Sudbai's left chest. However, the other party showed no mercy or any intention of taking a break. He stepped forward again, and every movement was extremely fierce. As if what you are facing is not an enemy, but a vast ocean pressing towards you. This is the way Qin soldiers fight? It's a bit similar to the improved military body boxing in the People's Liberation Army, but this era is completely different from the Qin dynasty, so what this guy performs is actually more suitable for high-level martial arts combat at the audience level. And this is something that the audience does not have at all, even those who come from martial arts families cannot do this. This is a completely different fighting technique born from two different world plane systems. Buddha could only grit his teeth and hold on. Soon, his shoulders, legs and even his brain suffered heavy blows one after another. After a few face-to-face encounters, the whole person became crippled. If it weren't for although his Buddha devil body was no match for Sudbai's ancient zombie second transformation, but it was still very powerful, other listeners might have had to choose to leave the body at this time. Of course, in this case, even if your soul leaves the body, it will be difficult to get a chance to escape. Tai Shanglajun is as urgent as the law. Soldiers, fights, and all those who are in formation, line up, move forward, and march. After Fatty's formation preparation was completed, a huge purple net spread out, directly covering the armor in front of him, which hindered the opponent's movements. Foye took this opportunity to withdraw. In fact, the damage to his physical body was secondary. The key is that when he faced the opponent's series of attacks, he felt an extremely terrible pressure, which was so suppressed that he couldn't even relax his soul. The fat man's net could only hinder the man's movement for a moment, but he still rushed towards him. At this time, the monk spread his hands, and a bodhisattva with angry eyes appeared in front of him. Sudbai's figure appeared at this time, once again standing in front of the armored man, and the monk also understood and penetrated this dharma into Sudbai's body. Immediately, a ray of Buddha's light condensed on Sudbai's body, and this ray of Buddha's light, because it is controlled by the monk, it does not conflict with the zombie evil energy on Sudbai's body. The monk hasn't advanced yet, so he can't really fight even if the dharma is added to his body, so he can only retreat and give Sudbai an auxiliary status. Sudbai pressed his hands up and crossed each other's hands together. The Buddha's light on Sudbai's body shook for a while, but did not dissipate. The two people's figures also stopped at this time. If it weren't for the light coming from both of them, a rapid crackle of bones could easily be mistaken for a set of performance art sculptures. Although Su Fu's talisman is gone, this suit of armor also puts a lot of pressure on you, right? Sudbai gritted his teeth and said. After the second collision, he could feel that the opponent's strength was much weaker than at the beginning. Jeju Lao Qin, together. Before the voice in the armor finished shouting, the fat man behind him immediately changed his technique, added another layer of netting, and cursed at the same time. Qin Shiwang, give me money. You are listening to Novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. Terror Broadcast. Author, Chunji Dixiaolong. Chapter 940. Qinhuangdao is a beautiful city, but it is not a big city in the strict sense. In addition, it has entered the off-season for tourism, and there are very few vehicles on the road from the city to Lelong to scenic area. Qin Yang was holding a cigarette in his mouth, not lighting it, but slowly chewing the tobacco. He had seen too many things today, and the impact was no less than the feeling when he first became an audience, so he needed to adjust good attitude. After all, when I get home, I have to face my wife and children. His home, his warm little nest, has always been his paradise, so he respects it, even, piety. Diddy. The phone rang suddenly, and then it said that the order was received successfully. Qin Yang frowned. Did he forget to close the software just now? He was indeed a little unsure. After all, his original mentality had been in a restless state since he picked up the man at the airport, so it was normal for him to forget some things and neglect some things. After all, I can't compare with that psychotic person who gets colder when he gets nervous. Qin Yang thought of Subai, that guy who he didn't have much contact with but felt deeply about. That guy was already a high-level listener. He himself was also thrown away so far without knowing it, so far away that he could no longer he is a world figure. Some are sighing, and some are disappointed, but everyone's pursuit is different after all. Qin Yang's pursuit of power is just to live for a while longer, not to become stronger, but to be gentle with himself, his wife and children who have not yet grown up, stay for a while. He is a person who is tired of family affection and is willing to do so. Of course, Subai is also the same. He is also tired of family affection. However, Qin Yang insists on enjoying the warmth with his wife and children for a while longer, while Subai is tired of family affection. Bai's persistence is to one day be able to twist off the heads of his biological parents with his own hands. Well, it's essentially the same. Qin Yang decided to accept this order because he felt that it would allow him to return to his previous life more quickly and face his wife and children who would welcome him home for dinner with an ordinary person's mentality. Moreover, according to the positioning look, the taxi driver was not far in front of me. After a while, Qin Yang saw a man and a woman standing by the road ahead. They should be two tourists. Rolling down the window, Qin Yang stuck his head out and asked, "Did you take the taxi?" The man was holding a camera and carrying a travel bag, and the woman was carrying a small bag. The two of them smiled and nodded while opening the door and getting in the car. When Qin Yang was about to shift into gear and continue driving, the man who had just got into the car said, "Master, we are going to Lilongtu." But the order said it was going to the city. I had to go home, so I took the order on the way. "Look, your positioning is wrong," the woman complained to her husband. "I'm sorry, master, can you send us there? I'll give you double the fare," the man begged. In fact, if it were the past, Qin Yang would still give it to him. After all, he needs money, clean money without cause and effect, and enough money to leave for his wife and children, because he doesn't know when he will suddenly, a normal way to die. But this time, Qin Yang didn't want to go back. He instinctively rejected the possibility of meeting the man coming out of the sea again after driving back to Lilongtu scenic area. "I used to drive Didi. Master, this is the first time I have taken my wife on a trip in so many years. Please do me a favor. The plane is delayed. We booked round-trip air tickets for cheap, so we have to go and get my wife today. The leader is playing." Now that the man had said that, Qin Yang could only give a bitter smile. Forget it, just go back and make peace with him as he came. He had already sent that one over and didn't worry about bringing him back again. After making a U-turn, Qin Yang drove towards Lilongtu scenic area again. In the car, the woman seemed very calm, while the man kept looking out the window, looking a little nostalgic. "Brother, have you been to Qinhuangdao before?" Qin Yang asked. Taxi drivers can really choke you to death if they don't know how to chatter. Because of the nature of their work, apart from listening to the radio, they only have to chat with passengers. You can't watch videos or play landlords while driving, right? I've been here for almost 20 years. My son was just born at that time, the man sighed. When I came here last time, this road had not been built yet. 20 years ago, Qin Yang thought for a moment and said with a smile, "I didn't see it, brother, you are really tender-faced." "Haha, no matter how young I am not as young as my wife." Do you think my wife is in her 40s? The man pointed at the woman sitting next to him as if she was offering a treasure. The woman had her eyes closed, she was probably not sleeping, but she obviously didn't want to talk to the man. Sister-in-law is also young. I envy you. Qin Yang's words are nonsense. In fact, to a certain extent, he has been able to achieve ageless appearance, but the problem is that his real lifespan is basically not that long. The probability of accidental death is really too high. Therefore, in the audience circle, both experienced and high-level listeners rarely talk about secondary nonsense such as longevity and Tiankai. The improvement of life level brings about the extension of lifespan, but it seems that under the elimination mechanism of the audience very meaningless. Is this your son? The man said, pointing to a photo placed in the corner of Qin Yang's car window. Yes, my son is 3 years old this year. It's good. Children at this age are the most fun, the man said. It's very skinny and I have a headache. Qin Yang smiled. Actually, the child is the most playful when he is 7 or 8 months old. He is as pink and tender as a porcelain doll. Ha, yes, it's just a pity. Children have to grow up after all, the man sighed. When I was naughty when I was young, I just had to worry about it, but when I grew up, I completely changed. This is normal for parents. It's normal. Isn't that what we ourselves have experienced? That's right, we still walk through it the same way. Brother, is your son married? It looks like he is in his 20s, right? Morning, it's nothing to do with the shadow. If this kid can get married early and have a grandchild, why would we, a couple, go out and run away? Haha, young people nowadays are not in a hurry. They always feel that they are still children and want to play for a few more years. Young people always have a different worldview. I'll just let him do it. He's very picky and we can't make the decision. Let's push him sometimes. He's even anxious to us, saying he wants to adopt a grandchild and bring us a grandchild. Don't you think he's angry with us as a couple, too? Ha 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 ha. Qin Yang was really amused this time when he heard this. Interesting. This man is very talkative and humorous. He seems to be able to pick up any topic and make you happy to communicate with him. When the car drove back to Lelong to scenic area, Qin Yang actually still had some unfinished thoughts. The woman got out of the car first, while the man and Qin Yang handed each other a cigarette and then got out of the car too. Qin Yang lit the cigarette and finished it slowly. He looked around again to confirm that the person was not nearby. At that moment, he could only pat the steering wheel casually. I won't wait for you anymore, go home and have dinner. You seem to be talking more and more, the woman said very calmly. She did not show any clear dissatisfaction, but her tone did give people a cold feeling. You don't talk much. Do you regret it? The woman looked at the man. Do you regret not raising him as your son? I have nothing to regret, and I'm not that naive. The man took out his camera, took a few steps back, and said to the woman, it's rare that I can go out for a walk and take a picture for you. Come on, pose for me. It's beautiful, always beautiful. The woman ignored the man and walked toward the scenic spot, while the man followed behind and kept taking pictures, enjoying it endlessly. Finally, the two people climbed onto the ancient city wall, facing the sea. However, it was not the spring season. At this time, the seaside in the evening was actually a bit chilly. Hey, I don't believe it. I think about all those messy things when I'm bored, but you never thought about it. The man leaned on the city wall with his back and looked at the woman. The wind blew her bangs, bringing some fragments and chaos, but she showed a more elegant look. The man said she was beautiful, and he had always been handsome and upright. Even though he looked older now, he still looked like a mature man. Temperament. The woman shook her head. Really, the man still didn't give up. A smile appeared on the corner of the woman's mouth and she looked at the man. Am I that boring? It's not a question of whether it's boring or not. 2 or 3 years ago, he was here, going crazy and trying to avenge you at all costs. The man's eyes were a little blurry. Did you really not think about anything at that time? I think you are really thick-skinned. When he was born, you put him directly under the tap in the middle of winter. When his head popped out of the glass rod, you held down his head and pushed him back underwater. Now, are you bored enough to fantasize about another outcome and choice? If you really become such a boring person, wouldn't the rich man who was almost tricked to death by you have to die in peace? Don't blame me. You're not much better. After using your sister's body, you actually let her run back and lie on the bed to rot. I always think your aesthetics is distorted. Oh, the woman frowned and looked at Su Yuhang. Then you have to stay with me forever from now on. Wouldn't it be difficult for you? Ha ha ha, I'm really not interested in eternity. The man looked at the woman and said seriously, I chose this path because I just want to stay with you. Two clay dolls are smashed together and kneaded with water. Together, we can reshape you and me. In my opinion, it is not romantic enough. I want to become the only one with you, and this time has no end. Terror Broadcast. Author, Chunji Dixiaolong. Chapter 941. At this moment, Subai was still a little bit lucky in his heart. If it weren't for the suit of armor on the opponent's body, all four of him might have become his first sacrifices after he escaped from trouble. Even though he kept saying that he would only kill Subai. Bai is a man, but he is a guy who has been imprisoned for more than 2,000 years and his brain circuit is obviously a little abnormal. Can you believe what he said? Furthermore, even if he had not been imprisoned for 2,000 years, he actually showed dissatisfaction with the first emperor at that time, which is enough to show that this guy's thinking is obviously very different from that of normal people. Let go now, it's still too late, Subai reminded. Normally, Subai wouldn't be so easy to talk to, but he and the person in front of him really had no grudges in the past and have no grudges in the recent past. It's really worthless to continue fighting like this. Besides, Subai didn't have any quarrels in the past. I have experienced the feeling of powerlessness when you face a guy with abnormal mental thinking. This time, it seems that the script is reversed. Hey, today, you have to die. The other party directly rejected Subai's suggestion of a truce and continued to exert force. At this time, the armor on his body began to show wisps of blood lines, which seemed to be inspired by special characteristics, but this special characteristic was not suitable for the current wearer. Any blessing given by the person in this armor would suppress it further. Subai once again felt that the opponent's power had declined a little. The next moment, Subai let out a roar. This was a signal. Fight back. The fat man's face turned the color of pig's liver from suppressing the pressure. He bit his tongue again and squirted out a mouthful of tongue essence and blood to weave a third net over it. The monk's face was serious, and his body was shaking. Obviously, it was really a lot of pressure for him to forcibly activate the Bodhisattva's Dharma body with his yet-to-be advanced strength, but the monk still condensed Vajra Arhat's Dharma body again. It hit Subai directly and gave Subai a second blessing. The injured Buddha on the other side did not use a knife, and bright red flames began to emerge from the wounds all over his body. In the injured state, he used a secret method to forcefully activate his potential and rushed directly. Boom! Buddha's body hit the armored man hard. The armored man's body trembled, and his whole center of gravity and foundation were shaken. After the impact, the flames on Buddha's body also dissipated, and he knelt down half kneeling. He was on the ground, panting, and wanted to stand up again, but he felt as if his body was completely squeezed dry. Subai took this opportunity to step forward, clasped the other person's neck with one hand, and then leaned over. Boom! The armored man was thrown directly to the ground by Subai. This seems to be just a simple fighting technique, and even from a viewing point of view it is uglier than a street gang fight, but the real secret lies inside. The stalemate between the armored man and Subai is not so much a stalemate of strength as it is a competition for control of the surrounding environment. This time, with the combined efforts of the four people, Subai overthrew him, which is equivalent to this: for a moment, he controlled the surrounding space in his hands. Before the opponent could launch a counterattack, Subai pressed his hands firmly on the opponent's shoulders, intending to fix them there, and then it was up to him to watch the fat man and the monk. The monk was about to come up, but his body shook for a while, and he knelt on the ground as if he was overstretched. The fat man continued to pounce on him, drew a talisman in the void, and hit the opponent's chest directly. Snapped. The talisman light collapsed instantly when it hit his armor. The fat man spat out a large mouthful of blood with a wow sound. He shook his whole body and fell to the side with a look of reluctance. The armor restricted that guy, but it was considered protecting that guy just now. The stalemate just now and this counterattack have consumed all the efforts of Fatty, Monk and Buddha. At present, only the strongest Subai is still trying to support them. Subai knew how terrifying this guy would be if he escaped completely, so at this time, he must be suppressed. There was no roar from the armored man. On the contrary, he seemed very calm, as if he was just a bystander throughout the process. Perhaps, in his opinion, this was just a game and he was the real protagonist. An astonishing scene appeared. The light on the armor was slowly fading away, and the strength of the man in the armor was slowly recovering. Obviously, over 2,000 years, not only Sufu's talisman was worn away, but also the set of talismans. Armor is no exception. The other party's hands were slowly lifting up. Even if Subai pressed his hands firmly, he still couldn't stop this from happening. The other party was like a cat playing tricks on a mouse, and seemed very satisfied with the first scene after he escaped from trouble. The game was even, enjoyable. "Why should I make peace with you?" the other party asked. "What qualifications do you have, to make peace with me?" Boom. The opponent suddenly stood up, and Subai, who was suppressing him, had his hands locked in reverse. Then, Subai felt a terrible force coming from his arms and shoulders. This force directly oppressed his knees, making it impossible for even an advanced listener like Subai, who was in the flesh-enhanced stream, to resist. Click. Subai had to kneel down on one knee. Under the overwhelming pressure from the other party, he seemed to be really powerless. Hiss. Tiny cracks began to appear on Subai's body. This body was facing all-round disintegration. It was not normal damage, but a kind of annihilation of the body, including the soul. As a Qin soldier, he certainly knew how to face a physically powerful guy. It's a pity that I don't have Qin Ge by my side now. If Qin Ge is in hand, even if you are like a drought demon, I can kill everything from you with one strike. There was a kind of nostalgia in the other party's tone, as if he was recalling the years when the first emperor swept across Liuhe in his southern and northern campaigns. In fact, his resistance at that time was not because of his cowardice, but a kind of unwillingness. He would rather go to the battlefield. He went to the battlefield to fight against the darkness and was unwilling to end himself in such an inexplicable way. In fact, the first emperor did not kill him directly but sealed him, which is enough to show that the first emperor did not punish him as a deserter. Is this the world after darkness has fallen? Why are you so weak? The voice in the armor sighed with a sigh. How did such darkness take away my country, Dachin? Subai wanted to refute that he was not the strongest, and he also wanted to refute that you were obviously a bug caused by tens of thousands of Qin soldiers killing each other and then absorbing the blood and flesh of the robe to strengthen the body, but now he was speechless, and because of the tightness gritting his teeth and holding on, coupled with the terrible pressure, Subai's teeth had cracks at this time, as if they were about to collapse. Fugui, I don't care whether you live or die, but today, I will accept the interest you defrauded me of. The opponent pulled out a hand, but it seemed that the seal of the armor had slipped further under its constant impact, causing its strength to continue to rise, so that now only one hand could suppress Sudbai's resistance. Of course, this may also be because Sudbai also consumed too many relationships in the stalemate stage just now. With the strength this person is showing now, it is estimated that even Chen Ryu is no match for him. Once the seal is completely released, Chen Ryu will be directly killed in front of him. This strength gap is really too big. A little more obvious. God knows what the first emperor did when he sacrificed the lives of so many elite men to create these perverts. Where did Su Fu send these perverts? 3 souls and 6 souls, listen to my orders. The fat man, who was lying on the ground and began to twitch, began to recite a spell at this time, but the other party just glanced at it, and a powerful wave of air swept out immediately, sweeping the fat man away. After landing again, the fat man was completely helpless. It saves people, and the air currents knock the monk and Buddha out one after another, and control them. Ah! A disdainful sneer came from within the armor. In fact, for him, the only thing that was a bit difficult to solve was the person in front of him, because it would take more effort to kill him. As for the rest of the people, it was completely optional. The role of Wu even has some uses, but this guy is soulless and cannot be controlled by himself at all, and he has a lot to do with his enemies. So, he must die. Crack, click, click, click. Sudbai felt that his body was cracking like a piece of porcelain. This time, even if he was immortal, there seemed to be nothing he could do. The other party knew clearly how to restrain himself. Strands of golden blood dripped from Sudbai's body. This was Sudbai's soul blood. It was the essence formed by the fusion of soul and body. It can also be said to be the origin. Sudbai's realm also began to decline at this time. He was like a sponge, being slowly squeezed out of his moisture by the guy in the armor. Advanced listener, intermediate peak. Advanced listener intermediate. High-level listener, low-level peak. Advanced listeners, low-level listeners. Sudbai was very angry. His realm and strength were the guarantee of whether he could survive in the future and the key to whether he could rescue the little guy. But at the moment, he could only feel the constant state of his realm. As he fell, his body began to slowly twist. It was obvious that as his level fell, he gradually lost the capital to support himself. A huge feeling of pain came, and Sudbai knew that this was the foundation for his advancement as an advanced listener. Soon, he would fall out of the realm of advanced listener. Haha. The being in the armor seemed to be enjoying this moment, watching his enemy struggle feebly in front of him, savoring the enemy's unwillingness and anger. This feeling made him more physically and mentally happy than drinking tea. A more solid golden blood began to flow out of Sudbai's body. It seems to be no different from the previous origin. But when this stream of blood flows out, the 3 bronze chains that were originally responsible for sealing this space suddenly began to tremble violently at this moment, as if they had instantly gained intelligence and became extremely excited. This is the breath of the Imperial Seal. The voice inside the armor was panicked for the first time. Terror broadcast. Author, Chunji Dixiaolong. Chapter 942. A large bowl of rice noodles, topped with a layer of fragrant braised chicken, sprinkled with thick coriander, and finally sprinkled with 2 tablespoons of dried chili pepper. The man ate it happily and felt much more comfortable all over. I took a big sip of cold beer and almost cried out in joy. Yan Huiyong wiped the corners of his mouth with the back of his hand in a very shameless manner, then he supported his waist with one hand and patted his belly with the other and walked out of the Luji rice noodle shop. He didn't go far, and he was leaning against a telephone pole on the side of the road. He took out a cigarette, lit it happily, and while puffing away at the smoke, he followed the girls in the hair salon across the street and flirted with each other. This is an old street. It does not belong to the ancient town. It is just a small block formed between the old buildings. The road is very narrow, but it is well equipped with food, clothing, meat, and cellars. Meat can be considered as everything. Brother, come in and sit, do something, brother. The woman standing at the door of the hair salon greeted Yan Huiyang warmly. They are warm and hospitable, and they are very concerned about every man who passes by who is busy working for the family and is the backbone of the family. They even do not hesitate to stretch out their hands to pull these men into their houses to rest and talk to each other. Yan Huiyang feels that every city seems to have an old street like this. Here, the sincerity and care between people that have gradually faded under the influence of the current money worship trend are preserved. In this impetuous society, it is only in them that some remaining traces of the ancient style can be found. Really? The world is getting worse and people's hearts are not as old as they used to be. After flirting with those enthusiastic and kind-hearted women across the street for a long time, Yan Huiyang finally chose not to bother them. He was doing well, so why should he cause trouble to others? Yan Huiyang's eyes were attracted by an old man carrying a bamboo basket. It wasn't because Yan Huiyang's tastes had changed so strangely and tortuously, but because he saw something unusual in the old man. These days, there are not many such things, but here you can still find people who can run around on the streets. After throwing away the cigarette butt and stepping on it, Yan Huiyang took the initiative to follow him, reached out and patted the old man's slightly stooped shoulder. "Old man, how do you sell this medicine?" The old man's bamboo house contains all herbal medicines. Herbal medicines are relatively common in Guangxi. "Do you want to buy it?" The old man's face was a little yellow, but he looked very energetic. There was no trace of turbidity in his eyes. Seeing that Yan Huiyang wanted to buy medicine, he immediately unloaded the bamboo basket and at the same time removed the medicine from his waist. "Take off the small scale and prepare for weighing." "Which one do you want?" the old man asked. "How many do you want? How much do you weigh?" "Please weigh yourself." Yan Huiyang picked his ears and said. Hearing this, the old man was surprised for a moment, and then showed a wry smile. His stooped figure straightened up at this time, and said, "I thought that secular mystical cultivators are rare these days. They are also old and decrepit. Such bad luck." "Okay, stop pretending. It looks like you have 500 years of Taoism, but your predecessor is not a ginseng at all. It is just a carrot that has been grown for 20 or 30 years. What's the point of pretending to me?" Yan Huiyang smiled, and the other party that little trick actually tried to fool him in front of him. Seeing that his disguise was torn apart, the old man knew that he couldn't hide it, and he didn't have the confidence to use his own tricks to hide his eyesight from the person in front of him, so he simply gave in. "Come on, take me to your carrot pit to have a look. I'm curious about what made you look like this." "Grandma, when did there be a virgin forest on this mountain?" Yan Huiyang is not a local, but he knows that even if a primitive forest of this size is preserved to this day, it will at least be labeled as a scenic spot and become a tourist attraction, but nowadays, this place is still relatively unknown, and even Yan Huiyang saw many earthen graves. None of the graves look like they belong to a rich and powerful family, so how could they be buried in such a good place? It also appeared half a year ago. I'm also very curious. Not many people know about it now. It seems that no one has noticed it, the old man leading the way explained. No one noticed it. Yan Huiyang finally got a taste of it. The current appearance of this place should be related to the audience, so the impact was dealt with by the broadcast. After all, this can be regarded as a supernatural phenomenon. A virgin forest appeared on a hilltop very close to the county seat. Isn't this nonsense? It may take a while for people to discover this as a matter of course and not find it strange at all. This method is very skillful for broadcasting. In other words, only broadcasting can do this. Reaching out and pinching a large banana leaf, Yan Huiyang looked at the remaining green juice on his fingers. This level of essence can be used directly as a spiritual elixir, but you must know that this body is just a banana plant. If pre-Qin monks passed by here, or if listeners with enhanced metaphysics found this place, they would definitely treat it as a paradise for cultivation. The spiritual energy around it was so rich that it was almost crazy. At the same time, these plants that were ordinary in the mountains actually grew spiritual energy. Due to the effect of the medicine, the carrot in front of me turned into a spirit by chance, and the big radish turned into a ginseng. This is it. The old man pointed to a place in front and stepped back. There is a pit in this place, surrounded by the roots of several plants, which are entangled here like a fence to protect the pit. Everything in the world has a spirit. Obviously, this is also done deliberately by the vegetation here. Yan Huiyang discovered that the surrounding spiritual energy radiated out from the center of the circle around this hole, and the spiritual energy here was the strongest. But here, there is nothing. Yan Huiyang squinted his eyes. Although he felt that threatening a big carrot was a bit too shameful, he still said in a deep voice, "Where are the things?" "Something." The old man looked very surprised. "There is nothing." "Nothing? Nothing can turn a carrot like yours into a spirit." Yan Huiyang obviously didn't believe it. "I remember that night, someone came here to dig a grave and take away an urn. Then I suddenly woke up, and all the brothers and sisters around me also woke up, but now I am the only one who can transform into human form," the old man said aggrievedly. "A man dug a grave?" Yan Huiyang frowned. "Could it be that one? Some things are absolute secrets in one circle. For example, Qin Yang was obviously at an absolute disadvantage in communicating with Fusu, but in another circle, it is not a secret, especially that night when he was enlightened. The change of guardian was at least public news among Yan Huiyang's circle. It is said that there was a big boss here in Guangxi at the time, but the former guardian of the place of enlightenment personally dug up the grave of his deceased wife, took out the urn, and then scattered with the ashes of his deceased wife. However, the big bosses of the previous generation had already left on the train, so some specific details could not be verified, but Yan Huiyang felt that he might have found the place. But does that guardian have a good mind? This is not a waste of money, this is a complete destruction of the family. You are letting go of your roots and your vitality as if you don't need money, and you are taking advantage of the flowers and plants here. You can just give it to me. It's really strange that you don't end up in ashes after playing like this." Yan Huiyang took a deep breath. Unfortunately, after half a year, the origin had long since dissipated. Even if it hadn't dissipated, it had been absorbed by the vegetation. This was of no use to Yan Huiyang. He had already reached this level after all. Ordinary medicine stones have no impact on one's cultivation. But Yan Huiyang was very curious. He was very curious about what that person was thinking and doing at that time. At that moment, Yan Huiyang opened his hands with one hand, and his spiritual power began to spread out. "Give me your memories of that day. I won't embarrass you. Besides, I know you understand what I mean. If you dare to act stupid and don't cooperate, I will pick it and go home to cook." Gradually, the surrounding vegetation swayed slightly, as if they had succumbed to Yan Huiyang's bastard spirit. The surrounding environment seemed to be filled with a layer of pink mist at this time. Yan Huiyang saw a bloated middle-aged man walking over with a shovel in his hand. Yan Huiyang subconsciously stepped aside and stood in the pit. The other side was afraid of blocking him. The middle-aged man began to shovel the soil. His movements were not very fast, as if the physical strength of the middle-aged man was no longer enough. At the same time, he was talking to himself while digging the soil. These words sounded like chatter. It's commonplace, but it has a different feeling when it comes out of the other person's mouth. It was a kind of sincerity, word for word, very ordinary and ordinary. There were no classic love words, it was just trivial things, but it was very touching. Yan Huiyang is not a sentimental person, but he noticed one detail, that is, normal people usually throw the soil in front of themselves when shoveling. This saves effort and is convenient, but the other party went around half a circle and piled the soil in front of them. The other side. It was as if he deliberately didn't want to splash dirt on Yan Huiyang's feet and soil his shoes. But this happened more than half a year ago. This is just a reappearance of the memories of these plants that became spirits. The grave was dug, and the man picked up a gray urn from it, as if he was holding his wife's hand again and murmuring the couple's words. In the distance, another phantom appeared. This person was known to Yan Huiyang. He was a big boss in Guangxi. He had already left by train. It seemed that that incident was true. That night the big boss I'm really here with him watching him dig his grave. The middle-aged man seemed to have discovered the man, and was about to leave with the urn in his arms. Before leaving, he threw the shovel away, and it happened to be thrown at the feet of Yan Huiyang. Of course, the shovel was also a phantom, so it was picture. Immediately, the middle-aged man and the big man seemed to chat for a few words, and then the man began to go down the mountain. The Guangxi big man followed him down the mountain, and the scene disappeared. Yan Huiyang frowned, then bent down and reached out to dig into the lush grass in front of his feet. A shovel was lying there. Come on. Yan Huiyang cursed in disbelief, but still picked up the shovel and filled the holes back one by one while cursing. It must be bullshit. Yan Huiyang still couldn't believe it. You are listening to Novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. Terror Broadcast. Author, Chunji Dixiaolong. Chapter 943. This is the breath of the Imperial Seal. The voice inside the armor was filled with fear and disbelief. This was a change that was beyond his expectation. In fact, even Subai himself was a little unexpected. He drank and pecked, as if it was God's will. When he advanced to the advanced audience, the last missing piece was made up by Jin Jin with his own body. As for the gold, it was originally used to mend the Imperial Seal, so it naturally carries the aura of the Imperial Seal. After all, it was once part of the Imperial Seal. Now, in this situation, my realm keeps falling and falling. At this point, an accident happened that neither party expected, happened. As for the consequences, Subai really didn't think too much about it, because no matter which consequence, could it be worse than the situation he was facing now? The three bronze chains showed an unusual excitement. This excitement was more obvious and clear than when Fusu controlled them before. When Fusu controlled them, they were just a magical weapon to suppress Sanjiang. Now, the three chains seemed to have a consciousness of their own. Subai's level is still declining, and the foundation of the advanced audience is being damaged, which means that more and more golden blood is flowing out of Subai's body. The being in the armor made a decision after a moment of trance. This guy had shown dissatisfaction and resistance to Xiaolong's decision. Naturally, it was impossible for him to immediately bow his head and worship him when he smelled the aura of the national jade seal Xiaolong held 2,000 years later. He was placed in the late Qing dynasty and may have been the one who shot in Wuchang. After a brief period of shock, there was an even more powerful killing intent. Now, no matter what Subai was, he wanted to kill Subai because he vaguely felt something bad. 2,000 years ago, he himself felt that he was destined to die, but Zilong did not kill him. Instead, he chose to suppress him with great difficulty, and even made the eldest prince his neighbor. He didn't think Xiaolong was kind-hearted and cared about old relationships, and he didn't have such a big face to let Xiaolong care about old relationships. What's more, Xiaolong was not a soft-hearted person. Therefore, he has been fearful and hesitant. What is the purpose of Xiaolong sealing himself here for so many years? Now, the person he was about to kill actually exuded the aura of the national jade seal. To him, it was like a cat whose tail was severely stepped on, and the fear deep in his soul was expelled. It was completely aroused, and at the same time, There was also a hint of hysteria. Boom. 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 3 loud noises were heard. At this moment, the 3 bronze chains that were originally responsible for sealing this space finally reacted and swept across in an instant, as if 3 arrows were shot, aiming directly at the armored man. The armored man continued to suppress Subai and destroy Subai's body structure with one hand. He pulled out the other hand and pulled one of the bronze chains in his hand. At the same time, he pulled hard and pulled the other chain. A bronze chain struck back. But the third chain still hit his back. The armored man thought that the impact of this chain would break his armor, but what he didn't expect was that the bronze chain actually penetrated directly. The armor penetrated his body smoothly, as if it had turned into nothingness at this moment, but at this moment, the armored man's soul seemed to have been severely beaten, and his soul was about to collapse. Trend. What is the most powerful thing about Qin Bing? It's his physical body. Subai experienced this firsthand when he was in a cave in a Tibetan canyon. A row of corpses of dead Qin soldiers actually withstood the collapse of a mountain-like rock. And this armored man was one of the 500 evil stars left after tens of thousands of Qin soldiers fought. The flesh and blood of the dead Pao Zi became a sacrifice for his body, which increased his physical strength to an incredible level. But then he was sealed. He had no time to think and continue to improve his cultivation, and he could not improve his soul. Therefore, his current situation is that his body is almost a bug, but his soul is still just a bug. An ordinary high-level listener, even if he has been trapped in a state of suspended animation due to the isolation seal for more than 2,000 years, his soul is still weaker than before. Therefore, when he discovered that the bronze chains could actually penetrate his body and attack his soul, he really panicked. But even at this time, he still did not let go of Subai. He knew that all this happened because of Subai. If he wanted to kill Subai before, he just wanted to take revenge on Su Fugui and vent his feelings about being sealed. After more than 1,000 years of suffering, he now knew clearly that meeting this person at this point in time was probably a fate-arranged plan. The reason why he was sealed and why he was not executed by Zilong was probably because he was part of Zilong's plan. He doesn't allow this to happen. He wants to control his own life, so this person must die. Boom. Subai felt that his foundation as a senior audience had finally completely collapsed at this time, and his level had begun to slip towards the peak of seniors, and this trend began to become more and more intense. Snapped. 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 The 3 bronze chains kept changing from solid to virtual and then from virtual to solid, constantly penetrating the armor of the armored man and striking at the soul of the armored man. The armored man roared loudly because of this, but he wanted to kill Subai. The idea was stimulated to the extreme in this situation. The immortality of zombies is an exaggeration, but they are indeed difficult to kill. But for Subai now, first of all, there is nothing for him to absorb in this environment, and secondly, the armored man is almost sealed. All of his perceptions of the outside world are like throwing him into a pressure cooker, slowly refining him to death. This is a kind of power to suppress others, and it is also an absolute torture. At this time, Subai actually has not many other thoughts in his mind. Even though his strength has dropped to the beginning of the senior level, he is still gritting his teeth and holding on. This is the only thing he can do now. Moreover, Subai also saw that the 3 chains struck the armored man very uncomfortable. The 2 sides were actually locked in a marathon race and their physical strength was close to the limit. Who could hold on with gritted teeth? Whoever can win, but judging from the current situation, the possibility of a comeback is already very low, because the other party can obviously last longer than himself. The fat man had completely fainted and was unconscious. Buddha still retained consciousness, but he was unable to break through the evil wind released by the armored man around him and trap him. As for the monk, he was completely submerged by the evil wind. His strength is the lowest and he has not advanced yet. He is indeed extremely weak at this time. Sometimes, not every hysteria can be exchanged for death. This situation fully illustrates a thing called despair. The overlord of Western Chu who once created the idiom of burning cauldron and sinking boat relied on himself. This kind of comeback can only be achieved if he still has a fighting army under his command. Similarly, why didn't the king of Chu fail to break the cauldron and sink the boat again at the end of the Wujiang River? Buddha tried several times, but he was extremely weak and couldn't break the situation. However, he still looked at the monk who was completely buried by the wind. Buddha knew in his heart that even if the monk had not advanced yet, the monk would not be able to break the situation. As for being so unbearable, the fat man's fainting was not an act. He had tried his best. Moreover, the fat man had been injured in the battle with Fusu a few days ago. He was also the same. The demon body was damaged and the Buddha body was ruined. He no longer had the strength to fight. Even he couldn't even deal with the dark wind in front of him. Now, it was very clear that after the armored man killed Subai, he would come over to take care of the three of them. There is nothing he can do with the fat man, but the monk, his killer, has a way. Buddha looked in the direction of the monk with a meaningful look. In fact, if the fat man hadn't fainted now, he would probably be thinking the same thing. At the moment, there is actually a very small glimmer of hope, which is the 3 bronze chains that suddenly join the battle group for some unknown reason. But what is very helpless is that even the addition of these 3 bronze chains seems to be unable to reverse the situation, but the monk can advance and try again, or more effectively. Give him the opportunity and luck to advance to Subai, who is currently in decline. Use this method to extend Subai's life, increase the time for Subai to hold on, and regain the balance that is still tilted even after 3 bronze chains are added. Buddha is sure that the monk knows what to do and has the ability to do it. Otherwise, why would those Indian bodhisattvas come all the way across the border to catch him? But the monk now chose to remain silent. He had no intention of burning the boat, nor at any cost, nor did he choose to hand over the foundation of his advancement to Subai. Buddha couldn't say anything about this. If he were in that position, he would probably make the same choice. That man in armor. He just wanted to kill Subai. He clearly had the opportunity to kill himself and the others just now, but now he just sealed it casually. It was obviously still useful for the 3 of him. Even if he is made into a puppet, who can guarantee that there will be no chance of backlash? Based on the monk's character and calculation, he should have confidence in himself. As long as he does not die, he will have the confidence to regain freedom and opportunities. Buddha tilted his neck back, and the crisp sound of Subai's body breaking was still heard over there. But Lord Buddha now. But I really want to laugh. Not laughing at the monk, nor at Subai, nor at myself. He didn't know why he was laughing. Terror Broadcast. Author, Chunji Disyao. Chapter 944. The bronze chains were still hitting the armored man non-stop. Ever since they started to switch between virtual and real, the armored man was basically helpless against them. These 3 chains were specially designed to trap him. If it had been in the past, now he can slowly find a way to break the bronze chain. In fact, this is why he deliberately left the lives of the other 3 people. After those 3 people were refined into puppets by him, it will be easier to break this chain formation. But at this time, he must seize the time to kill Subai in front of him. Firstly, the ominous premonition in his heart is getting stronger, and secondly, because if he wants to kill this guy, he must not give him any breathing time. Subai's level has now fallen below that of a senior person. This great regression in level has brought Subai an unimaginable sense of despair. Now he has no intention to think about the problems that Buddha has thought about, and he has no time to think about it. Complaining about others or feeling sorry for yourself, even if the end result of struggling is still your own death. But Subai will never give up. It's almost done, this guy is almost wiped out. Uncontrollable ecstasy began to rise in the heart of the armored man. Now, killing Subai was his biggest goal, and it was also his declaration of war and resistance to his own destiny. No one knew that Zilong would seal him in. The real reason here is that the ancestor dragon has long since fallen, and the Qin dynasty has also been destroyed long ago. Even the eldest son Fusu fell into a state of confusion when he just came out of the seal of the Buddha, drawing his sword and looking around. Arrangements, most of which are likely to have failed or been destroyed. After all, Dark Radio is not a vegetarian character either. But the fear of the ancestral dragon that was deeply rooted in his heart prevented the armored man from slacking off at all. No matter what, he had to kill the person in front of him. Perhaps it was because of the faint aura of the national jade seal that suddenly appeared on Subai's body and the reaction of the bronze chain caused by it that it stimulated the armored man in a deeper level. Fugui, he is your descendant. He will die first. Then when I get out, I will look for you. I want to make sure you are dead or not. Subai wanted to tell him that Su Fugui had farted a long time ago, but he was speechless. He could feel that his consciousness was falling into a fuzzy state as his body collapsed. In the human world, zombies are equivalent to it is a virus that is extremely difficult to remove from the computer, but now, this virus is facing the end of being completely eliminated. Everything. Your body, your soul, and your consciousness will all be erased without leaving any trace. The armored man's mind began to reappear in the scene where Su Fugui appeared here to communicate with him 20 years ago. At that time, he was full of hope for the arrival of Fugui, with a longing for freedom and escape from poverty. That people have also planned a beautiful blueprint for themselves, and even helped themselves design a plan to escape the darkness after getting out of trouble in the future. Everything seemed so beautiful. For him, the arrival of wealth was like an angel given to him by fate. But when I told him everything he needed, and even spent his precious energy to help the other person practice the method of success, the other person left in such a cool way. He left for more than 20 years. This was purely treating him as a person. A fool has played a trick on him. This sense of humiliation, has been irritating the armored man for more than 20 years. It can be said that he who dared to disobey the first emperor more than 2,000 years ago can only be called dumb, and the arrival of wealth more than 20 years ago was equivalent to giving this man who had been sealed for more than 2,000 years and endured more than 2,000 the last kick to Nian's lonely soul pushed him completely into the abyss of hatred and hysteria. And coincidentally, Subai now actually thought of being rich. Oh no. It's an eel. If the human body is compared to a bowl, then the bodies of athletes and professional soldiers are like ocean bowls. The size and diameter of the bowl are the standard for measuring how much energy a person's body stores. The change from a low-level listener to a high-level listener is also the process of the bowl gradually getting bigger. A low-level listener may be a barrel, an ordinary listener is a water tank, a senior listener is a water tanker, and a senior listener is almost a reservoir. The boss may be a big dam. At the beginning, Subai's enhancement and skills were all miscellaneous, almost like running a grocery store. However, as his strength and realm improved, the enhancement methods Subai chose became more and more simple, and they were basically concentrated. In the two general directions of Blood Clan strengthening and Zombie strengthening, these two liquids can be regarded as the two Tai Chi circle diagrams in Subai's reservoir. As for some other things that have been learned and obtained before, they have been suppressed underneath or somewhere in the corner, let alone being invisible, maybe even Subai himself had forgotten about it. But this time, the armored man's method of killing Subai was to squeeze everything out of Subai so that Subai could be completely annihilated. This was equivalent to draining all the water in Subai's reservoir bit by bit. Generally speaking, after the reservoir is drained, there will be a pile of miscellaneous garbage below, and even some small fish and shrimps. And this eel belongs to this category. If Subai hadn't sensed its movement in his body at this time, he would have probably forgotten its existence. Back then, Lord Buddha asked his men to transport the ancient female corpse from his temple to Shanghai. Subai strengthened the zombie bloodline, and finally Subai found out the identity of this ancient female corpse. The bug that entered her body when she was punished for committing a crime was the eel. At that time, Buddha had a bad taste and found the leaves of a plant planted by Jixiang that contained strong corrosive toxins, and asked Subai to wrap them and eat them together, just like eating meat buns. In fact, the effect was not obvious. Subai still doesn't know whether Buddha was really helping him or just wanting to have fun. After all, Buddha was in a state of enlightenment and preparation for advancement at that time. Man is like a little ruffian. This eel is all that remains of a female corpse. Thousands of years ago, she was punished by a mysterious and ferocious-looking high priest for planting an insect. She then endured thousands of years of loneliness and torture. When she was finally discovered, the temple feared that she would successive living Buddhas who brought harm to the world sealed it, generation after generation. Finally, in Gyatso's generation, Gyatso directly brought it over and gave it to Subai as a settlement. The eel's tenacious vitality is really scary. Even if Subai completely wiped out its consciousness, Subai still could not completely digest it. At this moment, under the crisis of life and death, it was reborn. Forced out, to leave Subai's body. In fact, it has no self-awareness at all. It can only be regarded as a weak energy form. To be precise, it is just a curse. Subai eats it, which is equivalent to transforming the curse onto himself, but this curse has no impact on Subai. It's like scratching an itch, equivalent to $1 to a billionaire, and it doesn't pose a threat at all. Boom. The curse of the eel completely collapsed under the collapse of the armored man. The armored man seemed very excited because he could feel that he had squeezed Subai to the end, and even the last miscellaneous things in his body had been squeezed out by himself. This person actually had there will be a guy who has the aura of passing down the national jade seal. The day of death has arrived. But when the eel completely shattered, some crystal fragments flew out, and Subai, who had fallen into a state of confusion, felt as if he had returned to the scene the eel had brought to him. It's just that this time, the previous scenes about Alyssa, the woman who killed the prince and was punished, were taken away in an instant, and even the loneliness that had been buried in an unknown area for thousands of years was taken away. In the end, what Subai had reached the last picture read. Amitabha, this coffin is not old enough. Hey, this woman still has something in her stomach. It's a pity. The year is really not enough. If we hadn't met her in this place, we would have made a midnight snack if we met her under normal circumstances. When Subai heard this voice, his heart suddenly choked. Su Fugui's voice, that damn Su Fugui. Silence, this was the voice of the third man. Forget it, it's too late. This is Su Yuhang's voice. During a previous trip to Dali, the monk took out an old photo of Su Yuhang with Fugui and another mage. Subai was also puzzled at first as to why the female corpse had seen these three people before. It was obvious that the time did not match up. Later, after discussing with Foye, he felt that it might be that Su Yuhang and the others were in a secret realm or story world. Anyway, there seems to be some chaos in time and space in that place. For example, Subai once told Lord Buddha how to advance in the story world of one-day prison, but in fact it was what Lord Buddha was doing when Subai was in the real world. No one can say whether there is a causal relationship here. Clearly, after all, no one can reach the height of broadcasting, and you don't know what principles broadcasting is based on to construct these bizarre story worlds. In the original scene, Su Yuhang seemed to have discovered something was wrong with the female corpse, and maybe even discovered Subai. He immediately put the coffin lid back on, and then Subai woke up. But this time, after Su Yuhang closed the coffin lid for a while, the coffin lid was lifted again, revealing a fat, round, and slightly bald middle-aged man's head. Who else could it be if it wasn't Su Fuegui? SHH, your dad is gone. Su Fuegui's words were like a bolt from the blue to Subai at the moment. Damn it, he actually had a new picture memory. He was careless at first and didn't take the time to study the curse thoroughly. Su Fuegui's smile looked very flat, but at least he looked sunny and normal, just like the fat man next to him. Maybe he didn't know how badly he would be tricked by Su Yuhang in the future, but that wasn't right either. He can know himself, so how can he not see the future? In other words, Su Yuhang had his own way of tricking this friend with such a far-sighted vision into that. Even someone like this can be tricked. How good is Su Yuhang compared to Lao Yin?